Hello, I'm here with Dr. Ciara O'Toole, who is a qualified speech and language therapist and also a researcher in bilingualism and developmental language development. So we'd like to ask Ciara a couple of questions about bilingual children and language assessment. So first of all, could you tell us a little bit from your point of view as a speech and language therapist, which you think are the challenges facing an SLT when it comes to assessing bilingual, multilingual children?
Okay. Well, I think at this stage, all speech and language therapists want to follow best practice guidelines, and they realise that they have to assess a bilingual or multilingual child in all of the languages to which they are exposed. Unfortunately, there's very little information about how to do that. So, I suppose one of the main challenges is, first of all, assessing the child in that language, and often they have to work with interpreters or bilingual co-workers, because most of the SLTs aren't bilingual in those languages themselves. And that has lots of challenges in itself, because often if you work with interpreters, there's a lot of training that needs to be involved. And I understand in the UK that there's a lot more bilingual co-workers now, and they're working alongside the SLT to assess the children, so that can be useful. We don't have that in Ireland quite yet, so we're still using a lot of interpreters, and that's proving challenging in the training. I suppose the children, it's really hard to tell apart what is typical language, second language acquisition from an actual language disorder, because children who are acquiring English or whatever the other language is as a second language make similar errors to children who have developmental language disorders. So it's how to disentangle what's a second language learning from actual disorder. So those aspects are really, really complex for the therapist.
And challenges, certainly. So there are many challenges, but some potential solutions, I guess. So what would you say are the tools currently at the disposal of SLTs that need to assess children that speak more than one language?
Yeah. Well, I was involved myself in a cost action looking at, it was called Bilingual SLI at the time, and so the Beasley cost action, and that aimed to bring together a group of researchers to develop tools to assist with speech and language therapists and others in identifying these children. So one of the first tools that we developed was a parental questionnaire. So it's really important to ask about language experience, amount, quantity, quality of all of those. So that tool is available. Similarly, Joanna Paradis has her tools available, the ALEC and the ALDEC, on her website. And so those tools are available for therapists to use when working with parents and asking about the language background. Something that I was involved in a lot was the CDI, Common Partner-Based Communicative Development Inventory, and that's been adapted to over 60 languages at this stage. So that can be a useful tool. Again, it's a parent report measure. The parent can complete it. It's been adapted into other languages, so the therapist doesn't need knowledge of the language and can rely on the parent's information. That's only really useful up to about the age of 3, though. And what we're finding is a lot of children are coming after that because they're sort of giving them time to develop. And again, in the cost action, we developed some tasks like this cross-linguistic lexical task, the CLT, and people can look that up. But again, it's been developed into about 25 languages at this stage. And again, it's a vocabulary test looking at nouns and verbs in different languages. Now, you see, that vocabulary can be something children can pick up, but it doesn't always identify the markers of language disorders that we need. So a lot of the time, the therapist might need to look up to look up the research, I suppose, and ethnologue and different aspects for what is important in this child's language. And really, a growth measure that we found was just actually trying to get a language sample from the children and calculate some sort of MLU, or with the help of a translator. Well, where's the verb? What's missing from the sentence? Are they marking, gender marking, whatever, case marking, whatever it may be. So that, even though it can be a bit more time consuming, is a really good method of getting some sort of language sample from the child. It pays off, in the end.
Okay, so maybe a good return on investment from the therapist part. Yeah, great. And thinking more closely about the IELTS situation, which is quite interesting because it's I suppose a minority language in a context where English is still the majority language. So what's going on in terms of language revitalization, and what issues does that bring along in terms of language assessment as well?
Well, I suppose Ireland, Irish and English are both statutory languages here, and they're both the official languages of the country, but in reality very few people speak Irish on a daily basis. Nonetheless, there is support for the language, and we do have a number of therapists who are employed to work with Irish-speaking populations in particular. And again, I suppose the challenges for them is that there's no monolingual Irish-speaking child. They're all bilingual from birth, and their input can be very different, depending on if their parents are L2 speakers or L1 speakers and what they're hearing.
I guess similar to the Welsh situation a little bit.
Yes, yes. But there's probably more native language speakers of Welsh than there is of Irish, so it is endangered. And I suppose we need to recognise it's very hard to identify what the target language is for the child. So if they're making an error, is that because they have a language disorder, or is that just because the language is changing and they're no longer using case marking, agenda marking, that kind of thing? So that can be, it's really hard to pinpoint what the target is because the language is changing and there's such high contact with English. So we have developed a number of tools of the CDI in Irish. There's other aspects, but it's trying to get those on the ground and in practice, because a lot of tools we felt are in research but not necessarily in clinical practice. So trying to work with clinicians on using those tools and helping them to identify what are the kind of markers of language impairment in Irish. And this is something that you're doing at the moment. Yes, well. Yeah. And another aspect of Irish language is that a lot of children, everybody learns Irish at school, and there's actually a lot of Irish immersion schools. So they're L1 is English, but they go to school through Irish. And what happens in those situations is when a child is identified as having a language disorder, they say, oh, now you can't go to the school anymore, you have to go to the English only. And that's not right either. It's just trying to find ways to support their Irish language development alongside their English language development, and recognising that some of their language knowledge will be from school, and we have to actually assess them in these two languages, even if their L1 is English. So that's a kind of a separate challenge, but it's another aspect that we're trying to work with. Quite a complex language situation on the ground. Well, thank you very much, Ciara. So I hope you will find this video of interest, and thanks again for your problem.